Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Strategy International. This is the podcast produced for Strategy International, a global think tank and consulting firm that brings together great people from all over the world that come together to analyze, discuss, and collaborate on matters of global interest, such as international policy and politics, strategy and defense, the economy, the environment, and much, much more. I strongly encourage you to visit strategyinternational.org, where you'll see all the beautiful things happening over there, as well as the entire back catalog of all these great productions. Speaking of which, we have great guests again to discuss an urgent matter, one that is ongoing, which is the conflict in Israel. Joining us, of course, is Dr. Efthymiopoulos. He is the CEO of Strategy International. We have Dan Feferman, who's the executive director of Sharaka, as well as Dr. Ahmed Khuzaie, the political affairs director for Sharaka. Sharaka, for those who don't know, is a non-governmental organization. It was established in 2020 by people from Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, following the signing of the Abraham Accords. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the podcast. Like I said, this is the second in a series of podcasts that eventually we'll be doing, discussing this ongoing issue that has obviously affected the attention globally, I think, in the world, and we're going to continue. I think maybe we should bring everyone up to speed on what the situation is. Last episode, we spoke about that horrific terrorist act committed by the Hamas that started this offensive. Since then, we've seen bombings, specifically targeting the Gaza Strip. Of course, the collateral damage is in the thousands. It is a humanitarian crisis that has veered everyone's attention from all over the world to that little region in the Middle East. And we're going to discuss it. We're going to see exactly what has been going on, the developments, and some analysis of what perhaps is to come, hopefully for the better, but who knows? Gentlemen, thank you for coming again. Who wants to take the lead on this, just so that we can go forward on this second week, I think, or third week since the beginning? Dan, maybe you want to take the lead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sitting here in Israel, about maybe an hour and a bit's drive from the Gaza Strip. Have rockets raining over my city multiple times a day. And what can I say? This is not a situation we expected. It's not a situation we wanted. The terrorist attack launched by Hamas was on a level of brutality and, from their perspective, a level of success that we've never seen before. And so we were completely caught off guard. We paid an incredibly high price in mostly civilian deaths, 1,400, and bodies are still being found because the way Hamas managed to invade our border defenses and neutralize our surveillance systems in the south, they basically ran roughshod in the 20 communities that border the Gaza Strip security fence, and went house to house, murdering families, children, elderly people. They also took around 200 people captivity, and so within a day, first of all, forces were amassed, those who could get down quickly to the Gaza Strip to neutralize those terrorists, and we found a confirmed 1,500 bodies of dead terrorists killed by first-line defense forces. It's estimated that well over 2,000, maybe 2,500 actually came in, and they went house to house, just killing people. So in the fields, cars alongside roads, you name it. And so as we're reeling out of that, Israel began its retaliatory strikes against Hamas infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. And the way you described it is quite accurate. There is unfortunately a very heavy death toll in collateral damage in Gaza and among Palestinian civilians. It's never clear because Hamas, of course, likes to lie and conflate its own fighters and terrorists as civilian deaths, but certainly it's in the few thousands already. And the fact that they have their infrastructure significantly built up within the densely packed Gaza city, and most importantly underneath it, makes it a very messy and difficult kind of war.
I want to talk, just as we're wrapping up a little bit the context. There is growing pressure coming in internationally, specifically for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Is there any news with respect to the humanitarian corridor that everyone has been calling for with Egypt?
As far as I'm aware, the Israeli military has agreed to allow humanitarian supplies to come into Egypt. There's also an element here of Egypt needing to agree to it. Egypt is, I think rightfully so, very concerned that it will be infiltrated and overwhelmed, first of all, by refugees, economically, demographically, politically. It doesn't want to have to deal with Palestinian refugees. I think the track record of what happens to countries' stability in this region, wherever Palestinian refugees goes, should speak for itself. And Egypt has its own concerns with the Muslim Brotherhood, and has been dealing with ISIS on its own in Sinai for quite some time, which works very closely with Hamas and with Islamic Jihad. And it doesn't want terrorists or fighters, whatever you want to call them, going back and forth between Egyptian territory and Gazan territory. And so it's very concerned about that. And the Israeli Defense Forces want to ensure that they're not smuggling in goods through the Egyptian border, or possibly smuggling out the captives into Sinai and then into Africa, which would be, of course, almost impossible to find them if that happened.
Right.
But last I saw that there is some movement to try to get humanitarian goods in through the Egyptian border.
There's also been a call from the King of Jordan for the refusal of refugees, both in Egypt and in Jordan, on the grounds that this humanitarian situation needs to be dealt with inside Gaza. Any comments on that, Ahmed?
Now, I will come from a different perspective. I won't be speaking on my behalf, since we have an Israeli talking about how it is in Israel. So I'll be talking about what's going on from the Middle East kind of perspective. Now, what everybody's talking about, and the notion today around the Middle East, it's all pro-Palestine, no matter if it's right or wrong. Now, it's not easy to change that narrative. It's not easy to say that this act is wrong by the side, or this act is right by the side. It's either you take one side or you're outcasted. Now, when it comes to the refugee situation, I'll link it to even what happened by Hamas from day one. Now, it was brutal what they did to civilians, saying it's wrong, saying it's right, having a say in it, actually, in the Middle East, became a taboo. Nobody was allowed to talk about it. Everybody was celebrating what Hamas did. Now, that being said, now we're talking about the refugees. Mostly, the notion is that those countries have to step up and do something about it. That Israel has to stop all of the operations that they're doing, without understanding the implications, without understanding the result, without understanding what's going to happen to those countries. Just like Dan said, if Egypt opens its border, it won't just have civilian refugees, it will have Hamas. While we all know what Sisi did from day one, of taking after mercy, eliminating the brotherhood. So they won't do that on one hand and then let it come through the back door. That's not going to happen. Same thing with Jordan. Jordan have been dealing with this issue from day one. And I'm not sure if it's safe to say that more than basically half the population in Jordan are actually Palestinians. So having to receive more it's not that easy economically. It's not easy culturally. It's not easy demographically, and mostly even economically. So I don't think they will do it. Now, President Biden, one of the things that was discussed is the refugee situation and how can it be accommodated by all of those countries combined or individually. It's not clear yet, but it's not an easy situation to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mario, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, I want to add that Sisi's initial reaction was that he made a statement early days that we need to secure national boundaries. And by saying that, he would not agree to people going into the Sinai. That was the idea. In the second information now, in the parliament, I think he was in the parliament when he was speaking, or the presidential palace, because it's not clear where he was, but it was somewhere official. He clearly mentioned that the humanitarian relief work means that they will not be able to accommodate people within Egypt, for the reason that if they are moved into Sinai in Egypt, then that means that it would be the end of Gaza. Therefore, would not allow them to move to Gaza for the simple reason that they have to stay somehow, basically stay and fight. But allow me to say two things that I think are important, because we may not, I'm not in Israel right now, but I'm totally opposite to Israel. So I see what's happening. We all see what's happening with flights coming in, coming out all the time, and more. They've stepped up in Cyprus, security on every single place, and not only of worship, but also other places that can be possible targets from airports, first entrances and places of going outside. But what is very important to say is that we have to separate at this point, at early stage, what happened with Hamas versus the solution to the Palestinian issue. What Hamas did, and I was very adamant from the beginning, very clear, because in my logic, whoever commits a crime is a criminal. And therefore, what they have committed, the way that they have committed it, and the description and the pictures that are coming out from the way that they have committed it, is an act of terror. And it's an act of terror because it's also massive killing. There were cases in a kibbutz where they actually threw a bomb in a bomb shelter. The people were there, and that says a lot about security, like how, like they targeted, they were waiting for people to go inside the kibbutz so they can throw a bomb into this. Okay, that's an act of terror. That's a crime. And as it is a crime, we all need to condemn it. Now, away from this, my initial reaction is, if somebody would do that in Egypt or in another country, wouldn't you expect the Egyptian government to react? I guess I would. I guess they would. And the reaction is targeting Hamas. Maybe the mistake that Netanyahu does at this point, is that he has to come out and say, deliver Hamas and everyone who is involved in the political or military aspect of Hamas. Because yes, there's a humanitarian issue. There has always been a humanitarian issue in Gaza, long before this kind of fights that started on 7th of October. But the reaction of any state versus collective terrorism can be traced to a limit in a possibility of people trying to somehow at least secure the grounds that they control. Now, the fact that they're going inside Gaza means that the Palestinian Authority has failed. And that's what Hamas wanted, to showcase how the Palestinian Authority had failed already in Gaza. So this attack has multiple messages. It's not only about Iran, it's also about the Palestinian cause, and so on and so forth. Don't also forget that they are trying to destroy all the relationships and all the trilateral, multilateral alliances that are built so far. They're targeting also the Abrahamic Accords. They're targeting also the solution from the Palestinian, having a Palestinian state through Saudi Arabia, and the discussions of having a possible two-state solution, which you understand that will bring another level of development, resourcefulness, and a lot of other options to rebuild and allow people to rebuild their states. It is also obvious that education and health, whatever this may have been, and there are a lot of millions and billions that have circulated, either also directly from the EU or indirectly through countries like Holland, like Germany, like others that have provided money, that this money was really not going towards schooling, towards better options and opportunities of people to be on the safe ground. And that we have to be secure. It was of no coincidence that Macron came out and said, from now on, the money that goes to Gaza, we will control it from the beginning until the end. We, he said, not only the EU, but we will control it. Mm-hmm. It is also evident that the UAE is giving money towards Gaza, for example, through the United Nations. This also changes the route, because until now it was going to the Palestinian Authority. And more and more and more. So we have to see on a wider scale, first, what happens in the military aspect of this. Netanyahu declared there's a war situation, and logistically talking, there's a situation being built up for an immediate land attack. What happens then? Scenario one, what does it mean if this is a message for more powers to come in? More powers have joined in, Americans, British, French, and so goes on and on and on. NATO forces are operating under US flag. NATO forces, like Greece, for example, has 2 ships and so on. Turkey wants a part of the game, but they're claiming populist activities. Jerusalem is ours. Palestine is ours. We will go for humanitarian relief. Where do we stand into this, dear gentlemen?
Interesting points, and I want to get to that, because the strategic aspect of it and the preparation and the potential ground attack is one that we should definitely talk about. But because you mentioned how this conflict will potentially or has potentially affected the multilateral agreements, since we have the 2 gentlemen here from Sharaka, which was a product of these agreements. How do you see it, Dan? How do you see the future of the Abraham Accords? How do you see the future of these potential partnerships that either have been created or could have been created?
Look, I've been working nearly 3 years nonstop. Actually, even before I was involved in Sharaka, I was working on this on an individual level. And Ahmed's been with me for the last year and a half plus working on these issues. A lot of progress has been made. We've managed, we the collective people who support the Abraham Accords, and of course the governments who initiated this, managed to bring the region to a new area where, first of all, governments should be able to talk to each other directly. People should be able to communicate or travel to each other's countries, conduct business. I didn't quite realize the level of ignorance about Israel in these countries, and the level of a lot of pent-up hostility. And I get where it comes from. It comes from years, decades of, if you see just one-sided news your entire life, or if you just watch fake news, a lot of the stuff you see in the news is also fake, or in social media, you're going to become very polarized on an issue. The Abraham Accords have given us an opportunity to start peeling that away and start building a dialogue based on people actually getting to know each other, people actually getting to visit the other countries, and seeing that their governments are behaving like grown-ups and talking. This conflict, it's going to set it back a little bit. I don't think, and I don't hope it's going to completely undo it, because I think the strategic interests at play are bigger than the emotions of the peoples in the streets. But not just because it's my job, but it's in my DNA to be hopeful about this. It's going to take some time to recover from this and try to build back trust and understanding, and time will tell how long that will take exactly.
Ahmed, anything to add?
No, I think Dan covered the whole aspect of this.
I want to talk a little bit, and Mario mentioned this, and we're going to transition a little bit to more of a strategic approach on what might happen potentially and what dangers could come of a ground attack. We've seen foreign visits in the region. Obviously, the U.S. Secretary of State, and not only in Israel, but he went and visited a series of Arab nations and twice in Israel. Of course, this is before the U.S. president arrived. I know that the Canadian foreign minister has traveled there. The U.K. prime minister, I believe, is there as well.
European leaders.
Say that again.
The European leaders of the European Parliament. The European
of course, there's a lot of political attention in the region. What is the purpose of their visits? Are we going to see Israel engage in a ground attack? Is this what they're trying to kind of mediate? What's going on there on the ground from a political perspective? Ahmed.
No, okay. Now, from a political perspective, first of all, we have to understand that almost the entire Western world is standing by Israel, and such visits, if they don't show that much of a solidarity, I mean, everybody's is traveling just to show their solidarity, and that's a big message coming from the West. We're talking about the Prime Minister of the UK, we're talking about the United States, as you mentioned, Canada, and other states. On its own, that's a clear statement that the West stands by Israel. Now, on the second point, what are they going to do about it? The President of the United States declared aid, declared negotiations with the government of Israel and the Middle East. Of course, Blinken has been traveling back and forth between Israel and the Arab states over the past week, just trying to find a solution. That's on one hand. On the other hand, basically, first step, de-escalation. Second step, finding a consensus. Third step, get it over with. It's not that easy. It's easier said than done, but from what I'm seeing, that's how it's functioning so far, in a very, very civilized manner, which is something we don't see around this area much, especially with how it all started, brutally. Now, where is this going? Nobody can say, but I think with that kind of pressure, it shows a lot. It shows that something is going to happen in favor of peace building. I mean, it's the elephant in the room that nobody is willing to acknowledge. Peace is happening whether people like it or not. There's no way out. It's the only way forward.
But Ahmed, I wanna add something here.
Sure.
You think that the movement and logistics of a whole army getting ready in different parts of their own country to go into war, more than 400,000 recruits, people traveling front and back, do you think that this would help peace? Because the way that it's interpreted, there's a preparation to it, and in the meantime, there are rockets being fired upon now. Hezbollah as well, the latest, like 2 days later onwards, the first event, and rockets are flying all over the air of Israel. Like a few hours ago, there were some missiles to Sderot again, one more time. I don't see it as peace. Or if they aim to negotiate some sort of peace element that may lead into different levels, then we can split into how do we stop it, how at least temporary ceasefire comes along, and maybe we go back to negotiations on the Palestinian issue itself, but with more proactiveness rather than just proactiveness in words. But again, you cannot, like, if you were a leader of this country, for example, you would not accept to go to proactive engagement of negotiations at the moment when you receive rockets. And a few days ago, you just lost more than 1,000 people in your, from your country that were literally assassinated.
It's an interesting question, and maybe one of you can answer this. And I just want to add to that. Perhaps a peace negotiation is in the works, but I just want to remind everyone that Netanyahu was very clear in his objective, which was to completely annihilate Hamas. how soon can that happen, and how can he even look towards a peace negotiation when that progress over there isn't anywhere close?
And
Okay,
can
I'll
it
answer the
take place
first part,
with
and I'll
minimum
leave the second
casualties?
part to Dan. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it happen with minimum casualties.
yeah, before we continue, let me just admit the last player over here. Uh, he came in a little bit late, but we're more than glad to have him here.
There he is. Welcome.
Hi, Janiel.
Hi, good morning from sunny Colombia to everybody. Good afternoon to you all. I'm sorry I had the time difference all wrong in my head. I'm really sorry.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I'll just take it over from the last question. So yeah, Janiel is joining us. Maybe Dan, you can answer that question. How imminent could this peace negotiation happen when Netanyahu's objective was quite clear in annihilating Hamas and just cutting, its head off?
Peace negotiation with whom specifically?
Well, that's the first question I think that everyone needs to ask. But how is, depending with who that negotiation is to happen, can it happen when the main objective isn't anywhere close to being accomplished?
Hamas today is a massive challenge. I think for all of the moderate countries in the region, Israel is the one that actually has to face it. But Hamas and what it's representing, what it's trying to do, the broader network that it's connected to, is a major challenge. I think it's obvious to this forum, but it should be said. They're not looking for negotiations. They're not looking for peace talks. They're not looking to recognize Israel in any kind of borders. And they've been clear about that over the years. The most they've been willing to say is they'll accept partial ceasefires, which it's clear to us now that they just want to do that in order to accrue their strength so they can attack from a stronger position later on. That's exactly what they just did. We fell into the misconception that they wanted stability, they wanted more work permits for Gazans to come into Israel. It turns out they were using that to collect intelligence and of course to get to tax those workers. So with Hamas, it's obvious there's no one to talk to because they seek war and destruction. The other problem of that coin is that they seek war and destruction, right? So they have a goal to upend the Abraham Accords, to upend the coming peace talks with the Saudis, to upend all of the positive things. As Ahmed said, peace is happening in the region because countries are realizing that it's the best thing in their interests. And the way that actors like Hamas and the larger kind of Iranian radical axis doesn't view interests and gains and in terms of peace and economic prosperity. They'll gladly burn down the house if it means having just to achieve their goals. And if they kill every last Israeli and Palestinian and ultimately other countries to do that, I think they won't blink an eye over it. So the question then is, first of all, what does Israel actually want to achieve? Was Netanyahu just saying that to placate a domestic audience? Or is from hearing a lot of Israeli strategists and kind of armchair analysts, is this the time that Israel finally rips the Band-Aid off and really takes down Hamas? Does it mean leaving Hamas in place and completely wiping out its military capability? Does it mean getting every last Hamas leader and ensuring that Hamas as an entity no longer exists? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what's realistic. The one thing we do have to be quite aware of is that with every Palestinian civilian harmed, and as we found out yesterday, it doesn't even matter if they're harmed by Palestinians, because the world immediately rushed to blame Israel. The world immediately rushed to believe the propaganda arm of a terrorist organization over that of a democratic state with a free press. And so Israel is even paying the price for things that it didn't do. So imagine when it accidentally does take down a building that has civilians, like it bombed the media building in the last conflict. Imagine when it actually does something that actually warrants criticism or questions. The clock is ticking on how much Israel can actually operate in the Palestinian territories. And, the only reason Hamas is still around is because Israel hasn't been willing to do what Assad or Putin or other leaders of that sort have done in other conflicts, which is just, absolutely carpet bomb, and it doesn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of civilians get killed. Israel just isn't willing to do that. And so what I think you need to see here is some kind of regional solution to Hamas is the only way out of this. I'm not really sure where it goes from here.
I want to give the opportunity to Janiel to maybe join in here with respect to these potential negotiations for peace. Where does that leave Netanyahu and his military organization? We know that there are hundreds of thousands of troops that are aligned around Gaza, waiting for the order to move in. Is this potentially what they're trying to avoid, and countering that perhaps wish of the international community? Will Netanyahu still go forward?
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to join in. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. First of all, the situation is very complex, of course, but as the days have gone through, we have seen videos of at least 7 Palestinian organizations, militant organizations, that recorded or their participation in the attack. It's not only Hamas, right? So it's Hamas, it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is the martyrs of the Al-Aqsa Brigades, is the martyrs of Al-Qassam Brigades, is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, is the Palestinian Resistance Community. And I think I'm missing a few ones also. But what I want to highlight with this is the situation, the peace negotiation, if you want to call it that way, are going to be very complex in the way that you're not only dealing with Hamas, you're dealing with several other groups that do not necessarily align themselves in a hierarchical position in which they answer to Hamas and what Hamas wants. So that is a very complex scenario, right? I think that I agree with Dan. I was having some technical issues here. I think I lost you guys for a second, but I agree with a part of the statement that he made earlier. In terms of peace negotiation, well, Hamas is not going to, get into any final decision in order to go through a peace solution for everybody. They're going to try to gain time at all. It's a long war. I mean, the name of this game is a long war. And I want to remember a term with this. My Arabic is not fluent at all. I think Ahmed can make sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly. But it's called khudna, which is a temporary ceasefire. They can come to some sort of agreements to ease the pressure of the situation right now. But at the end, they're not going through the path to a final agreement that establish lasting peace for everybody. And I remember that I was thinking about this just a few days ago when all this was evolving. And I remember, from the perspective of Islamic resistance movement of Hamas, during the Crusades, Jerusalem was for 88 years under the hands of Christians, and how many years have gone through since 1967? We are not even there to go to equalize that term in terms of time. So I think that the long term is going to be the maintenance of their objective. I think they're very clear. They're not going to sit and negotiate a possible solution from their maximalist term of view. I don't know if maximalist is a word that I can translate into English. They're trying to achieve certain goals that are just impossible. Going back to the 1967 borders, which is presented by some academics and analysts as a possible way to, ease the situation and come to an end of this horrible conflict. Well, that's not possible. It's not something that you can achieve. You have to cut an entire state in half. You have to cut entire highways and cities in order to go through that settlement. So the situation is extremely complex. I don't think that we're going to see, a de-escalation in the next coming hours or days. The possible military operation, ground operation, is going to be very painful in terms of casualties for the Israeli defense forces.
Ahmed,
I think they're going to have some sort of learning from the American experience in Mosul and Fallujah, if we get to this point. All right, that's it.
Ahmed, you wanted to add something to Mario's question?
Yeah, of course. Now, when I was talking about peace, I was talking about peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. There can never be peace with terrorists. It's a failed concept. Terrorists have one language only, and they can never be part of the solution. They have always been part of the problem. Now, in any country, in the history, in any state, whenever a war is over, you have to put the militias aside in order for you to talk without guns. That's peace. Now, whatever they have done, I'm talking about Hamas, the atrocities they started against civilians, no religion approve of that. I mean, there are rules of engagement in any war. If you want to start something, as it has always been, every now and then you see rockets coming from Gaza, then Israel retaliates on the same level, and then there's a ceasefire and everybody goes home. This time they took it to another level. That has never been the case before. Hamas on its own can never do that. They don't possess the level of sophistication to penetrate. They don't have the level of planning more than 3 days ahead. This can never be a planning of few days, at least 2 years, as per some reports. A militia can never achieve such a thing. That's the first point. Second point, about all the fleets that are gathering around the borders from the seaside on the west, about the international community talking about sending their troops and all that. That sends two messages initially. First, they don't want anybody to interfere from outside. Israel can handle Gaza on its own. I mean, you're talking about a regular, good old army. Of course, it's not old, it's the most advanced in the Middle East, but on the other hand, you're talking about a militia. If Israel wants to annihilate Hamas, they would. Maybe not fully, maybe not all at once. I don't know what's the strategy, but if they want to do that, and if Netanyahu said he will, he could. Now, all those armies, first of all, to ensure no outsider powers are going to interfere. And that's one of the things that's stopping Hezbollah, for example. Turkey, as Mario said earlier, many sides want to come in. These troops are there to ensure that no outsiders get in now. So once, after the complication goes aside, once things de-escalate, it's not easy to say when, but at a certain point it has to. So once it starts to escalate or de-escalate, all those other outside powers, Turkey, Iran, people who are supporting the Hamas, I'm not talking about the Palestinians here, can't interfere directly. Hezbollah, for example. Hezbollah has a different danger zone for themselves. Yes, they are firing rockets, not going full throttle, not going directly. It's part of the de-escalation game they are playing, because they know whenever anything happens, they'll drag Lebanon, a failed state today, because of them. They'll drag Lebanon into another war. Do you think the Lebanese people will keep quiet this time? They have nothing more to lose. So I think the troops are there to keep the status quo. That's one side. And once it starts to de-escalate in whatever way it will, then a peace process has to happen, but without terrorists.
George, if I
go ahead,
may,
Mario.
when I meant peace process, I meant the Palestinian case, and I made it very clear that Hamas is a terrorist group, so there should not be any kind of like connection. That's it. And I said it earlier that Netanyahu's mistake is that he should have come out and say, deliver Hamas to us. Very simply put, all political, military, whatever they have, deliver them to us, and including also those groups that are under Hamas's attack at this point that Janiel mentioned correctly at this point. My concern is that when you put too many actors in front of a reaction that up to a level it is well understood why it takes place, then things become more complicated. It has been proven in history, especially in the Mediterranean region, that whenever multiple parties get involved, then that status quo that Ahmed mentioned has a tendency to change. And I think that either sides want to make it clear that if you go into war at this stage, some things around you will also change with regards to the posture and positions and so on and so forth. I also believe that because there was a small, but then again, possibility between Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize relations, plus to discuss in a more open manner and more normal interlocutors, not the ones that throw bombs to each other and that throw bombs whenever they don't agree with, then they created the reasoning to stop. Hamas attacked the moment where it mattered and things were coming into something positive. And we also have the tendency to forget that. Like we now see that we don't accuse Hamas anymore. We just forgot within a week's time. We say, okay, fine, humanitarian relief and I completely understand. I commit to humanitarianism, and I think everybody commits to humanitarianism. But how can you not react when these people are dead like this, and when you know that Hamas is controlling Gaza, and you know that these areas which are controlled under Hamas, they don't even allow to the Palestinians to react now against them.
Yeah.
And this is a problem. And I also stated in the beginning that there's no Palestinian Authority at this equation, which is the most legitimate, let's say, position entity that can negotiate some sort of a two-state solution or even a truce at this point. Where is Mahmoud Abbas? Mahmoud Abbas came after the sources said, okay, fine, we condemn terrorists, but it happened for a reason. You don't negotiate like that. You lose whatever, if any, legitimate causes you might have had to find a solution between Israel and Palestine, to find a reasonable solution to it. There's a problem. And again, the 1967 that Javier mentioned is really a good point, because Erdogan came out also and said, we want Palestine to go to 1967. Okay, it doesn't happen like that. Obviously, Greek-Turkish relations, for example, in this case, you can see it. It doesn't happen just like that. And you cannot go back to 1967. What you can do is you can become a force for stability and a force that will put two sides together to discuss and to find a solution. That you can, but being involved and then going into populist policies and adopting to populist policies where they claim in their own parliament that Jerusalem is ours and we're going to go get it, this throws more problems that have the tendency to become more periphery problems rather than looking at the very problem, which is Hamas. And in front of what is now being built on top is much more insecure than clear objectives. The objective is to take out Hamas, period. That's a clear objective. Now the objective is who comes first and who ignites the other side will come. Because don't forget the reaction also of Iran, how Iran sees the whole situation. and how Russia sees the situation versus the United States. So it has become very, very complicated and very delicate in a volatility that we have to make sure that does not surpasses the levels of, open war between each other. And maybe ironic to what I'm going to say, but the more Netanyahu delays onto a conclusion whether this is a war, an open war or not, and the more they listen, they may prepare for it, that's fine, but the more instability is created with the vibes that are coming negative again and again because it's not clear what is happening. Just remember the first days of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, how insecure the world looked like, the whole world looked like. For the first month, they didn't even know what was happening in reality. Now, in this case, where the reaction, when you know what's going to happen, you have the tendency to feel even more insecure because you know that if that area ignites, then God forbids what can happen next. And I think this is also the fear of the European Union as well. Being in a European country, the first border with Israel and Palestine, we have the fear of this one taking a shape of no return.
I wanna hang on to this concept here of this multipolar aspect that this conflict can potentially engage in, and specifically with respect to Turkey, where it's a well documented fact that there are Hamas pockets in Turkey. We're seeing massive demonstrations, obviously all over the world, but we don't have to dwell on that. The topic specifically is Turkey, where recently they broke into the Israeli embassy, and I think yesterday they attempted to get into a NATO base where the U.S. had its arms stocked, or they had arms stocked there. So there is a certain danger on the ground, and especially with the discourse coming politically from the leaders of Turkey. And let's not also forget the fact that they are a NATO ally when you have, for example, like Mario mentioned, the US, the UK, accompanied by Greek naval ships mobilizing in the Eastern Mediterranean. The role that Turkey has or will potentially have in this conflict, can we look into that? Can we analyze that? Why is Turkey's position being ignored, or at least there's a perception that the position that Turkey is taking is being ignored? And how can this affect its relationship with the West, if that relationship hasn't already been affected? Dan?
Yeah, I want to connect that to kind of Marius's point here. First of all, if this was a movie, the stances of countries like Turkey or Russia would just be laughable. The kind of mass, just carpet bombing of civilian areas in conflicts that they're involved in, and mind you, the conflicts they're involved in are not conflicts that anyone attacked them or invited them to join. They're conflicts that they initiated out of their own, and they
keep on going.
They keep on going.
While there's this case in Syria and Iraq where they invaded and they bombing everything.
It's laughable that they dare even speak up as if they're somehow the responsible adults in the room. But that's the game. There's a game here that's taking place across the region, and I think the Palestinian, we have to call them a leadership, but it's anything but. Not that I think the Israeli leadership has been exemplary in this last time around, but I was talking about this actually with Ahmed earlier today. Most of the governments in the region feel one way about Hamas and about this conflict, and then act publicly in a completely different way. And it seems that with not a lot of public messaging, actual leadership by the governments in this region, this could very well have been used as an opportunity to get rid of the Hamas and put into place the Palestinian Authority, backed by the regional Arab and Muslim governments, the responsible ones, back into place in Gaza, and could have saved this entire conflict. And instead, what you see is Abbas and all of his spokespeople they might as well be part of Hamas at this point with the kind of accusations that they're waging against Israel. And I've never understood why, other than that they maybe actually truly believe it. This is something where we know that most of the governments in the region would very much like to see Hamas gone, except they speak in only critical terms of Israel instead of taking this opportunity. So I'm not sure why there's this double game being played. And I feel it's just completely unnecessary to achieving the actual goals. The one thing that can end this and can actually put us in a better place is if all these governments actually came together, helped oust the Hamas, or laid an ultimatum themselves to Hamas. Hamas, disarm, get out of here, and let's let actual responsible adults take over reconstructing and then governing the Gaza Strip. Ironically for Israel, the West Bank is complicated. Judea and Samaria, as we call it, the rest of the world calls it the West Bank. It's complicated because there's actual territorial, there's actual territorial claims over Judea and Samaria. Israel claims parts of that for itself. Israeli Jewish heritage and holy sites are scattered all throughout Judea and Samaria. Israel has no interest in ever maintaining Gaza, and it proved that in 2005 when it left. And so it's ironic that the one place where Israel said, "Here, you take it, we're out," is the place where the most tragic of conflicts is coming from. It's a conflict that we don't want. So how can we get the rest of the region to align with this? And instead of turning it into, once again, Israel versus the Palestinians, this should have been everyone, including the Palestinians, against Hamas. And this is a huge missed opportunity that the region had here, because the brutality of what Hamas did was so in your face, and they recorded it, they GoPro'd it, and then put it online, that this could have been an ISIS moment. This could have been a moment that brought together every responsible party in the region and said, let's take care of this ISIS-Hamas threat once and for all. And it was just missed. And now we're back, like you said, we're back to this place where nobody's talking about October 7th anymore. Nobody's even talking about Hamas anymore. Now it's once again Israel is carpet bombing Gaza, and let's worry about civilians, which we need to do, but I think in a creative way that the kind of people are not talking about.
On another topic, actually related, but specific to what we're saying about the events that are unfolding in other countries. Like I said, I mean, Turkey isn't the only one. We're seeing the other day in Tunisia where they burned down a synagogue. There's massive demonstrations in Greece. There's demonstrations here in Canada, across the country. In the U.S., there was that 6-year-old Muslim boy that was killed by some psycho that thought every Muslim is a terrorist. They stormed the Congress yesterday in the U.S. How should countries react? And having demonstrations, I think, is an important staple of steady democracies all over the world. But we're not just talking about a democracy to either support Palestine or to ceasefire or anything that would have in other circumstances been normal. We're talking in most cases of pro-Hamas and demonstrations supporting these attacks that happened into Israel. How should countries deal with these demonstrations, or how should they react even to having these sort of events happening in their country? Janiel? I think you're muted.
Indeed, thank you. Yes, I think this is a very, it's a very interesting question. I want to address something that will allow me to trying to develop an answer for this question. First of all, I want to take something that Ahmed said earlier. Hamas and all these groups, they are not able to put such an attack. So there is an outsider allowing this to happen, helping this to happen. All right, that's the first. The second thing about something that also Ahmed mentioned, and then the timing, is exactly in the precise moment when a possible normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia was probably taking place in the region, and the whole geopolitical impact that we have that event would have given to the Middle East. The third thing that I wanted to mention is that, and I heard this a lot in the Latin American analysis scenario, it's an effort to show this attack as a part of national liberation kind of struggle. And I have been invited to many shows and news shows to actually address this situation. And my conclusion is that this is part of a bigger picture, a bigger agenda. This is taking place in the region, and it's a hybrid war between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which are 1,700 kilometers away. They don't share a border, so they have to find a common ground to meet. And where is this common ground taking place? In the periphery of the state of Israel, mainly. You name it, Gaza. You can talk about West Bank or Judea and Samaria, which it's the same for me. It's southern Lebanon, it's Syria, and I just want to address this because hybrid wars is just the mix. I don't want to get into details of a very conceptual development about it, but it's the mix of two different things: conventional war on one hand, and a non-conventional war, or regular war and irregular war, right? And you have to put this together, and they mix, and you have to add new technologies. So one of the main characteristics of these hybrid wars and scenarios is the use, of course, of terrorism, the use of proxies, the use of these proxies in heavily or dense populated areas. So it makes it so difficult to respond without causing collateral damage, right? And that collateral damage is going to be used again as a weapon in another characteristic of hybrid war, which is the media war, or the disinformation war, or the propaganda war, whatever you want to call it. For me, is probably the same. Now, this situation is also presented in a way that lawfare is also a part of the hybrid war. The use of transnational crime organization is also a part of hybrid wars. Now, I want to address this because, on my view, on my analysis, the only regional actor that has this capability, it's Iran. And it's a problem not only for Israel, it's a problem for instability for the region. I am a professor, I teach in university dealing with Middle East foreign policy or world order and international security. And once I address this area, most of my students, I ask them, which conflict do you think has the most, or which actor do you think is the most related actor in terms of instability in the region? And I get all sort of answers. But once we start developing the framework in which we're going to conduct our analysis, Iran, it's all around. It's all around. It's around in Syria, it's in Lebanon, it's in Hezbollah, it's in Palestinian Islamic Jihad, it's in Yemen. And that situation, I think, is a very, very complex scenario. And as I mentioned before, we're seeing also, this is not only limited to our regional scope. I'm talking to you right now from the northern part of Colombia, just the other side of the world in Latin America. And we're seeing a huge Iranian influence in the region. Huge Iranian influence. In the last decade, the Iranian Islamic Republic has doubled their diplomatic missions in the Western Hemisphere, and that's fine. Countries can develop economic ties and cooperations, and nobody's going to argue against that. But something that is extremely related to this huge increase of influence in the region is instability in some of the countries that are not fully aligned with Iranian interests or geopolitical interests. And that's something that I wanted to to address also, which is also a characteristic of hybrid wars. So you create this media pressure, you create this narrative, you use social media, you use new technologies, you use cyber attacks, and all these put together with the other characteristics I just mentioned, is that you have, a perfect recipe for instability for any country that is not just aligned to you. And one of the things that I'm seeing this way evolving or unfolding, it's mass protests in Western countries that are creating more tension, more instability, and of course, that's something that is very concerning, rising levels of anti-Semitism and possible levels of threat for local communities and their institutions, namely schools, synagogues, and the sort of institutions that are civil by nature.
What repercussions or what effects can that have on the political front on these in these foreign players? We have members of parliament here in Canada that are of Palestinian origin. There's even in the U.S. there are some Arab members of Congress and the Senate, I believe. The impact and the influence coming from the ground, from the electorate. How does what kind of impact can that have towards the politicians, and in reaction to that, to the statements and the support or not support that comes out of the political classes of all these countries? Ahmed.
George,
Yes.
before Ahmed goes on, just to remind you that there is a minister who's Palestinian in family background in the UK, who has his family located in Gaza. And they've been apparently trying to get them out for about a week's time. And they initially could not locate them. Then they locate them. It is, it has become more complicated. Complications are complications, and all the things that we're talking, it's about war situations. Ahmed, I apologize for this.
No worries. There's no easy answer to this. I'll quote something that President Trump mentioned a while ago about how the West has been infiltrated through unsolicited kind of immigration. Now, when it comes to such societies, we're talking about the policymakers leaning towards something that's outside of the country where they serve. For example, if we have Palestinian origins serving in the United States Congress, now, whatever they're going to vote for, is it in the best interest of the United States, or is it in the best interest of their origin country? Now, that's something huge happening around the world. I'm talking about mainly the Western world, due to the migration that happened a while ago. And I'm talking about the last wave. I'm not talking about the immigration that happened around 200 or 150 years ago, because the current one is somehow endangering the West as we know it today. A movement, or basically an NGO by the name of CARE in the United States, between now and then, they come out with funny ideas. The other day, a few years ago, their spokesperson, Mrs. Sarsour, was talking about forbidding the pork, while it's a Western, mostly Christian world. Then again, she started talking about having Sharia law as the law of the land. No problem. You can mix with the West, you can live with the West, but changing it to become what the Middle East is, what's the point? Stay home.
Can I just add something to this? I think that Ahmed is correct to an extent that you go to another country, you abide by the rules, the regulations, and so on and so forth. You learn the culture and civilization. I think that's part of the game. You're not trying to change this. In the United States, in the New World, or in all of the continent of America, this may have been quite a bit different, because that was the New World. George, myself, we are Greeks. George is Greek Canadian. He lived there, and if something happens to Greece, then someone, he will react the way that he can react within legitimate terms. And that's the most important element that we have not put inside the legal element, that you have legitimation to do a protest, you have a legitimation to ask for support, you have the request to go to courts, you have the request to prove your argument and your statement. What you don't have the right are things like the one that did 2 days ago in Brussels, who went with a football T-shirt and went to shoot 2 Swedes in the middle of a mall, I think, or whatever this was, and shouting different stuff that are not really making things easier. Don't forget that earlier, a few years ago, if you remember, you had some people, hostile lone wolves, as we call them in counterterrorism stuff, that they were going with knives and stabbing everybody in the middle of Europe. And there was a push up on this thing. So Europe eventually reacted within its own borders, within its rules and regulations. The problem with Israel and Hamas at this point is that you have asymmetric hybrid attacks by people that they don't want a resolution to the conflict. They don't want a two-state solution. They just want to kill. And that is a problem by definition. You cannot talk with this kind of people. You even if you wanted to talk to them, you cannot. Like they don't live in the same planet of rules and rules, regulations, and values, and you name it. Changing things from the societal point of view. Sometimes countries change on several things, and sometimes we are adaptive and we're welcoming things. Kosher food or halal food. Initially, for example, in Greece, a very traditional, very religious country, would not easily accept that. But nowadays, you see halal food, you see kosher food, and so on and so forth, and you see that people are trying to adapt, namely in the level of business. The problem arises when you want to change things, as you correctly put, like when you literally want to change everything and go the way that you want to be. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is another reality. It may not be directly related with war, but I think that the war of civilizations and that level of change of civilizations, we may as well live within this right now. We may be at the middle of things as they are changing. And that's the scary thing, because you don't know what's going to wake up tomorrow, what you're going to wake up to tomorrow.
I want to wrap it up just very quickly, if we can address another question, and I'll just make a link to something that we noticed here in Canada almost immediately when this conflict started. There was an email that was leaked from some person that was positioned highly at the CBC. The CBC is a public broadcaster with directives on how to address this issue and what to say and what not to say. And in that email, he specifically, directed everyone that would be reporting on this issue to not qualify Hamas as a terrorist organization, to avoid making that link. And I've been wondering, since the conflict ever started, the role of the media. And, I know that you all have appearances on media, and everyone pretty much looks at the media, especially when there's a conflict of this magnitude and potential scale happening. What is the role of the media and the importance that they have on the accuracy of the information that is being reported? Dan, you wanna take that one on?
No, let me digest that a little bit, if I may.
Sure. Janiel, you wanna start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think I just mentioned it just a few minutes ago. It's very worrying. And I want to put a very concrete example of this. Yesterday, I'm sorry, I'm all messed up with the time difference, but a few hours, a day ago, we saw the unfolding of a very tragic thing, and it was reported worldwide as an intentional bombing of the Israeli Defense Forces on a hospital, and the killing of 500 people being treated in that hospital. And within minutes like this, most media outlets out there they just kind of go with the flow. Apparently, nobody had a cold mind on it just to double check.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get more information. Let's try to take some of the things evolving in this complex situation like salt, just a pinch at a time. And we saw this within minutes, and the damage it's already done. I mean, as the events unfold, we start to get more information on the table. And it's apparently not the hospital, it was the parking lot, which is, of course, I read it's within the boundaries of an international protected place that should be left aside from direct confrontation and hostilities. But who controls the death casualties in Gaza? I mean, it's a health ministry which is dependent on Hamas. So you are taking their account as given by God. That you don't have to double check. You just go with the flow. And the damage is already done because, as I mentioned, as you see the information coming on, you see the tapes, and there was a platform launching rockets to Israeli territory, and just within seconds, you see the impact not far away from the platform that was, striking Israeli territories and terrorizing civilians all over the place. And you see a recording of a conversation that was filtering that allegedly signaled their responsibility not to the Israeli Defense Forces, but to Palestinian militant organizations. And you have, of course, some media outlets are serious enough to realize that, oops, we think we made a huge mistake going forward this path so quickly, so easy, and they try to reframe the information in order to, probably there is some responsibility from Hamas when that was supposed to be done in the first place, and the damage is done. And what I want to highlight here is that we are in the middle of a propaganda war, an information war, and unfortunately, media outlets out there in the international community doesn't seem to be aware of it and to take things seriously enough in order not to demonize a country and to blame it for everything that goes wrong in the Palestinian territories, and to blame it for every dead people that is now being registered in Gaza. But actually making it easier to a terrorist organization to wash their hands,
mm-hmm.
to present themselves in the international system, in the international arena, as a political and legitimate actor to discuss with. And I think that's very repugnant.
Dan, on the role of the media and the accuracy of the information that is being portrayed?
Until last night, I was shockingly surprised at how responsible and empathetic the Western media was, because they usually do not know how to report on this conflict. And then the supposed hospital bombing. And, Janiel touched on it. I was just reading actually a very long post by some kind of Arab intellectual who I'd never heard of. Bravo to him. The gulf between what happened and what was immediately reported within minutes is so vast that I think every mainstream media outlet outside of Israel needs to be absolutely ashamed of itself. And every Arab state, every person who posted about it immediately on social media needs to shut down their accounts and go home. I mean, let's look at what was reported to have happened and what happened. And this is just such a classic case. And the media just absolutely failing on its job. Explosion supposedly a hospital destroyed, hundreds of people killed. First of all, if there is a bomb landing on a hospital and hundreds of people are killed, you cannot figure that out within an hour. There is so much chaos and destruction, injured, burned, people everywhere, rubble. You just can't figure that out. And then, of course, it was Israeli. And everyone's rushing to immediately blame Israel. And now there are repercussions to this, because now you have violent protests happening all over the world. By the way, when 1,400 Israelis were butchered last week, you didn't see any Jewish communities violently protesting anywhere. They were holding vigils. They were holding memorial ceremonies. Nobody was attacking the local mosque because of a distant conflict between two groups that are religiously or ethnically connected to you somehow. There are actual real-world repercussions to this, and every single mainstream media outlet, New York Times among them, the New York Times put a picture of a decimated building on its front page, look it up right now, that actually had nothing to do with this. As it turns out, and the IDF said, we're going to investigate, we're going to see what happens. They looked at what operations were flying around. They looked at if anyone could have done this. They looked at signals intelligence. They looked at video footage from Al Jazeera, and they said, guys, this wasn't us. Then it turns out it wasn't the hospital. It was the parking lot next to the hospital. And then it turns out it wasn't 500 or 700 or 800 civilians killed. It may have been a few tens. And again, I hate to be the one saying it like this, because even if 10 civilians were killed, it's awful. But Israel is being forced to be in this place of, you guys are making us out to be something that this doesn't even happen. The whole incident that the whole world is absolutely going nuts about didn't even happen. And the mainstream media is listening to Hamas, and Hamas, okay, we all agreed a week ago Hamas is a terrorist organization. Now you're buying the information from its information bureau without even a bit of critical thinking or investigation. This is just malpractice. And it's causing actual harm, actual deaths, actual people are going to get hurt. There are violent attacks. The tiny Jewish community left in Tunis, one of you mentioned it, was violently attacked. A holy site was desecrated. Israeli embassies reportedly are packing up and getting out of there in Muslim countries because of a jihad rocket that fell in the parking lot next to a hospital. They immediately lied about it and made up an insane amount of people who were killed by it. And so the mainstream media should know better. I don't have a lot of expectations from Arab world media. I think if they actually started reporting the truth about what's happening in the world, I think this world would be a better place. Ahmed and I also discussed this earlier today, but that's a different conversation. It's so disappointing to see that if the media actually did its job and fairly reported on a conflict and waited for evidence and maybe didn't give credence to a terrorist organization that it itself just a week ago said this is a terrorist organization, I don't think we would have half the problems that we do, because most of the anger and hatred in this region is fueled by perceptions. And the gap between what's actually happening on the ground, which is bad, and the perception of what's happening on the ground is so staggering that people are protesting and hating and calling for death against Jews over things that aren't even actually happening. As part of our work in Sharaka, we try to bring a lot of intellectuals from around the Arab world and Muslims from around the world to Israel just to see for themselves. And usually, Ahmed, you've done 2 of these yourself, and you've participated in another one as a staff member. Ahmed, what is the gap between what you thought was happening here versus what you actually saw?
In a nutshell, media coverage. What I've seen, what I've witnessed was exactly the opposite of what we were told, what we were shown. It was not easy to compare, and it was not easy to come to terms with whatever we were spoon-fed ever since we were kids, until I saw and witnessed with my own eyes, with my colleagues here, some of them, how hypocrite the media could be.
It's I always tell our groups when they come here, and most of them are intellectuals, most of them are highly educated people. we have enough issues here in Israel. There's an actual conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. It's very complicated. But the media has a role. It should have a role in portraying things as they are, and not making things up that completely inflame a regional opinion about this. And I think they're just completely failing in their job. And I thought they had it right for the first week until last night's event.
Gentlemen, we can go on for a long time, and perhaps there will be another episode in this series with the unfortunate events happening in Israel. I want to thank you all for taking the time. I know that you're all very busy individuals. To everyone listening or watching, please do head over to strategyinternational.org. You can look up everything that is being done over there. There are numerous publications and productions that have been done specifically for this conflict. If there's any other area of interest, there are tons of things that you can find back cataloged over at that website. Thank you all for tuning in again one more time. And thank you, gentlemen, for participating. Very informative and very much appreciated.
Thank you very much to all of you joining us. Thank you very much. Thank you, George.
Thanks, guys.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.